Cozy Tales Collective, where dreams begin and worries fade. Welcome, dear listener. It's time to rest, to let go of the day, and to embrace deep relaxation. Take a slow, deep breath in and exhale gently. Feel the weight of your body sink into your bed, as if you are floating on a soft, drifting cloud. Let the tension melt away. Your forehead softens, your shoulders relax, your breath slows. Now imagine yourself carried by a gentle breeze, drifting toward a peaceful night's sleep. Let your thoughts fade into the background as we begin our bedtime story. A Night to Remember. The city was alive with a hum that felt almost electric. A steady rhythm of neon signs blinking, car horns echoing off brick buildings, and the faint, soothing melody of saxophones spilling out of dimly lit jazz bars. It was Valentine's Day, 1986, and despite the biting chill of February, the streets were bustling with couples holding hands, their laughter mingling with the city's pulse. Emily tightened her scarf and glanced at her watch. 7:30, she murmured, her breath a soft puff in the cold night air. She looked up at her boyfriend, Alex, who was standing a few paces away, squinting through the large front window of a trendy new French bistro. "They don't have our reservation," Alex said as he turned back to her, a faint shrug accompanying his words. "They said they're booked solid." Emily's face fell, but only for a moment. "Are you sure? I called twice last week to confirm." "Positive. The hostess said she's sorry, but there's nothing she can do." They exchanged a look. Equal parts disappointment and amusement. The restaurant had been their plan for weeks, and now, surrounded by couples filing into cozy booths under dim chandeliers, their meticulously planned Valentine's dinner had evaporated into thin air. "Well," Emily said with a sigh, "we can either go home and eat leftover pizza or—" Her lips quirked into a mischievous smile. "We can wander the city and see where the night takes us." Alex's grin widened. "Spontaneity it is. Let's see what we can find." And with that, they slipped their hands together, their breaths mingling in the crisp air as they started walking into the heart of the city, ready to let fate take the lead. The sidewalks glittered faintly from the remnants of a light snowfall earlier in the day. They walked past window displays glowing with soft amber light, flower shops adorned with heart-shaped wreaths, record stores with stacks of vinyls in the window, and bakeries offering frosted cakes too pretty to eat. Emily nudged Alex's arm. "Do you hear that?" He paused, tilting his head. From somewhere down the block came the unmistakable sound of a street musician. Following the melody, they turned a corner and found an older man in a long coat and a wool cap playing a saxophone. His music poured out into the night like liquid gold, smooth and soulful, drawing a small, captivated crowd around him. They stopped to listen, the music wrapping around them like a warm blanket. Emily leaned against Alex, swaying gently to the rhythm. When the musician finished his piece, Alex dropped a few crumpled bills into the open saxophone case. "Thank you," the man said, tipping his hat. Emily smiled. "That was beautiful." The musician nodded toward a nearby alley, lit with strings of overhead lights. "If you like music, you should head that way. There's a jazz lounge a couple blocks down. Not fancy, but cozy. Best piano player in the city, if you ask me. Emily and Alex exchanged a glance. Why not? Alex said, and they set off toward the glow of the alleyway lights. The jazz lounge was tucked away at the base of an unassuming building, its door marked only by a neon sign that read, "The Velvet Key." Inside, the atmosphere was warm and intimate. A pianist played a mellow tune on a baby grand in the corner, accompanied by a vocalist with a honey-smooth voice. They found a small table near the back, where a single candle flickered softly. A waitress in a sharp red dress approached, handing them menus. "This place is perfect," Emily whispered as her eyes roamed the room, taking in the velvet booths, the wood-paneled walls, and the glow of soft golden light. Alex ordered a pair of cocktails, a whiskey sour for himself and an amaretto sour for Emily. As they sipped their drinks, they let the music wash over them, their earlier disappointment forgotten. Between songs, Emily leaned across the table. "See? This is better than any fancy French restaurant. It's like the city is deciding where we go tonight." "Sometimes it's good to let go of the plan," Alex agreed, raising his glass. "To spontaneity." "To spontaneity," Emily echoed, clinking her glass against his. After an hour or so, the call of the city lured them back out into the night. The air felt a little warmer now, or maybe it was just the lingering buzz of the cocktails. As they strolled down a new street, Emily's eye was caught by the bright marquee of an old movie theater. "Casablanca," she read aloud. "One night only." Alex tilted his head, considering. "You ever seen it?" "Nope. You?" "Never." "Well," Emily said, grabbing his hand, "tonight's the night." The theater was a throwback to another era, with plush red seats and ornate gold trim decorating the walls. They bought a bucket of popcorn to share, settling into seats near the middle of the room just as the lights dimmed and the projector began to whir. Emily found herself utterly absorbed in the film. The black and white images flickered on the screen, the story of love and sacrifice playing out to the soft crackle of the old speakers. At some point, Alex draped his arm around her, and she rested her head on his shoulder, the steady rhythm of his breathing grounding her in the moment. When the movie ended, the crowd filtered out slowly, a quiet buzz of conversation filling the lobby. "I get why it's a classic," Alex said as they stepped back onto the sidewalk. "What a movie." Emily nodded, slipping her hand into his. "I loved it. It felt like it was made just for tonight." The city seemed quieter now, though the neon lights still flickered and the occasional cab sped by. As they wandered without direction, they stumbled upon a park, a rare pocket of green amidst the urban sprawl. The paths were dusted with snow, and the lampposts cast soft halos of light on the benches below. Alex spotted a vendor selling hot chocolate from a small cart near the entrance and insisted they each get a cup. They sat together on a bench overlooking a frozen pond, the steam from their cups curling into the cold air. Emily took a sip and let the sweetness linger on her tongue. "This is exactly what I needed," she said softly. Alex looked at her, his expression tender. "Me too. I feel like tonight's been a little magical." "It has," Emily agreed. "And to think we would have missed all this if the reservation hadn't been lost." He chuckled. best mistake anyone's ever made. They sat in companionable silence for a while, the city stretching out around them, both intimate and infinite. As the clock ticked closer to midnight, they decided to head back toward home. Their legs were tired, and the night was settling into a peaceful stillness. Walking down a quiet street, they passed a record store that was still open, its windows glowing softly. The sign above the door read Midnight Vinyl. "Want to check it out?" Alex asked. Emily nodded, her curiosity piqued. Inside, the air smelled of old paper and polished wood. Rows of records stretched before them, their covers like miniature works of art. A man in a knit sweater stood behind the counter, nodding politely as they entered. Emily drifted toward the jazz section while Alex wandered into rock. After a few minutes, she found an album with a cover that caught her eye, a painting of a city skyline at dusk. When she brought it to the counter, the man smiled knowingly. "That one's a classic, perfect for a quiet night." By the time they arrived home, the record was spinning softly on the turntable, filling their apartment with a soothing melody. They kicked off their shoes and collapsed onto the couch, their fingers still loosely intertwined. Alex glanced over at Emily, who was leaning her head back with her eyes closed, a contented smile on her lips. "Not bad for a lost reservation," he said, his voice warm with affection. She opened one eye and grinned. "Not bad at all." And as the music played on, the city outside their window seemed to hum in harmony, wrapping up their night with a gentle, rhythmic lullaby. The Mystery Valentine. In the heart of the city, Valentine's Day always carried a unique rhythm. The streets hummed with an unusual energy, electric with couples sharing knowing smiles, florists working overtime, and record shops playing love ballads that spilled onto the sidewalks. It was 1987, and New York City was dressed in its finest February charm. For 32-year-old Claire Bennett, however, it was just another day. She pulled her scarf tighter against the cold wind as she trudged up the steps to her brownstone apartment building, clutching a bag of groceries in one hand. Inside, the quiet hum of her small space greeted her, just the way she liked it. Claire prided herself on being independent, single by choice, and happy with her steady job as a designer at a local ad agency. Valentine's Day, with its candy hearts and over-the-top declarations of love, was something she viewed with mild amusement. She kicked off her boots and dropped her bag on the kitchen counter when she noticed the pile of mail waiting on her doormat. Bills, junk flyers, and... Her hand paused mid-sort. A bright red envelope. There was no return address, just her name written in elegant cursive across the front. Claire Bennett. Her eyebrows furrowed. She didn't receive handwritten mail often. With a flick of her finger, she opened the envelope, pulling out a Valentine's Day card adorned with a watercolor heart. Inside, the card was simple but intriguing. To Claire, someone as lovely as you deserves to be reminded of how extraordinary you are. Your Valentine. Claire blinked at the card, flipping it over in her hands. There was no signature, no indication of who had sent it. She frowned, her curiosity already piqued. A secret admirer? That seemed unlikely. She wasn't exactly the type to attract romantic attention. Her days were consumed with work, and her evenings were spent with books or the occasional rerun of Cheers. Still, the card didn't feel like a prank. It was too earnest. She set it on her counter, but as she went about unpacking groceries and making dinner, her eyes kept darting back to the red envelope. Finally, she gave in to the urge to inspect it again. "Who could have sent this?" she murmured to herself. And just like that, the seed of an idea took root in her mind. She was going to find out. The next morning, Claire took the card with her to work. Her office building was a sleek gray structure in Midtown, buzzing with the constant activity of creative minds. As she settled at her desk, she couldn't help but show the card to her coworker and closest friend, Maggie. Maggie was a whirlwind of energy, with a head of auburn curls and an endless supply of opinions. She grabbed the card from Claire's hand, examining it like a detective inspecting evidence. "Elegant handwriting," Maggie said, tapping the card. "Definitely not some random guy from the office. This is thought behind it." Claire sighed, leaning back in her chair. "It's probably just a joke, right? Maybe someone trying to mess with me?" Maggie shook her head vehemently. "No way! This is romantic. Besides, who would even bother with a prank like this? No, Claire, this is real. You have a secret admirer." The thought made Claire's stomach twist in a mix of nerves and intrigue. But who? And why now? Maggie leaned forward, eyes sparkling. "We need to figure this out. Have you noticed anyone acting weird lately? Someone who maybe stares at you a little too long in the break room?" "No," Claire said, laughing despite herself. "My love life isn't a soap opera, Mags." Maggie shrugged. "Maybe not, but you'd be surprised. Love is everywhere. It's like glitter. Gets into places you didn't even notice." That evening, Claire decided to take her investigation a step further. She returned to the card and examined every detail. The paper was high quality with a faint embossed texture. The handwriting was neat and deliberate. Someone had taken their time. A thought struck her. She slipped on her coat and headed to the stationery store a few blocks away. The little shop was filled with the scent of paper and ink, its shelves lined with cards for every occasion. The shopkeeper, an older woman with kind eyes, greeted her warmly. "Hi," Claire said, holding up the Valentine's card. "Do you sell cards like this?" The woman adjusted her glasses and inspected the card. Yes, this is one of ours. It's part of a collection we've carried for a few years now. A popular choice this time of year." Claire hesitated. "Do you happen to remember who bought one recently?" The shopkeeper chuckled softly. "I wish I could help you, dear, but we've sold dozens of these in the past week. It'd be impossible to say." Claire thanked her and left, her lead fizzling out as quickly as it had come. But instead of feeling discouraged, her curiosity only deepened. The next few days were a whirlwind of small, heartwarming clues. Claire began to notice little things around her that might have gone unnoticed before. The stranger who held the door for her at the coffee shop. The coworker who brought her an extra donut in the morning. The neighbor she occasionally saw in the hallway who always offered a shy smile. Could it be any of them? On Friday night, she stopped by a local bar with Maggie, who was determined to keep Claire's spirits high. The place was lively, with an old jukebox in the corner spinning hits by Fleetwood Mac and the Police. You have to tell me, Maggie said, stirring her cocktail. Have you made any progress? Claire shook her head, laughing. Not unless you count wild speculation. For all I know, it could have been sent by someone I don't even know. Well, stranger things have happened, Maggie said, raising her glass. Here's to mysteries. May they always lead to something exciting. Claire clinked her glass against Maggie's, a small smile tugging at her lips. The breakthrough came unexpectedly the next morning. Claire's building had a shared laundry room in the basement, and as she was pulling a load of clothes from the dryer, she noticed something tucked under the basket of a nearby machine. It was another envelope, red, just like the first one. Her heart leapt. She picked it up and turned it over. To Claire was written across the front in the same elegant handwriting. With shaky hands, she opened it. Sometimes the best things in life are discovered when you least expect them. Trust your instincts. There was no signature, but the message made her pause. It felt personal, as though the sender knew her thoughts. She tucked the card into her pocket, her mind racing. That evening, Claire decided to take a walk through the city. There was something about the energy of Valentine's weekend. The glow of restaurant windows, the faint sound of live music drifting through the air, that felt more inviting than usual. As she passed a familiar bookshop, she saw a man inside stacking books onto a display table. He was in his late 30s with glasses perched on his nose and a kind smile as he chatted with a customer. Claire had seen him before. He was the owner of the shop, and she'd bought books there a handful of times. On impulse, she stepped inside. "Hi," she said, her voice light as she approached the counter. The man looked up, his expression brightening. "Oh, hello. Claire, isn't it?" She blinked in surprise. "You remember me?" "Of course," he said, leaning casually on the counter. "You've been in a few times. You're a big Fitzgerald fan, right?" She nodded, a smile forming. "That's right, The Great Gatsby is my favorite." "I remember," he said, his voice warm. Something clicked in Claire's mind. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the red envelope. "Did you send this?" The man hesitated for a moment, then smiled sheepishly. "Guilty as charged." Claire's breath caught. "But why?" He ran a hand through his hair, looking slightly embarrassed. "I've been meaning to say hello properly for a while now, but, well, I wasn't sure how to do it. When Valentine's Day rolled around, it felt like the perfect excuse to finally reach out." Claire studied him, her heart softening. "You didn't have to go to so much trouble." "I wanted to," he said simply. "You seem like someone who deserves a little extra thought." For the first time in years, Claire felt the stirrings of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time, the thrill of possibility. "Well," she said, her smile widening, "it worked. You got my attention." And as the night unfolded, filled with easy conversation and shared laughter, Claire realized the truth in the sender's words. Sometimes the best things in life really do happen when you least expect them. Cupid's last mission. The sun was setting over the bustling city, painting the skyline in hues of rose and amber. From his perch on a rooftop, Cupid stretched his sore wings and sighed. His quiver was nearly empty, His feet ached from chasing wayward lovers all day, and his golden bow felt heavier than usual. Valentine season was always his busiest time of year, but this one had been particularly grueling. And now, just as he was about to clock out, a voice boomed from above. "Cupid!" He groaned and rolled his eyes. "Yes, boss?" A shimmering figure of his supervisor materialized in the clouds, all flowing robes and glowing light. "One last mission for the day. 2 hopeless romantics. If you succeed, you're off the hook until next year." Cupid perked up, though his enthusiasm was tempered by exhaustion. "2 romantics? Easy. That's my bread and butter. Just point me in the right direction." The supervisor's glowing form wavered, clearly holding back a chuckle. "These 2 are, let's just say, complicated. Good luck." With a flash, the figure disappeared, leaving Cupid holding a slip of parchment with 2 names scrawled on it: Lila Bennett and Evan Carter. Cupid found Lila Bennett sitting in a corner cafe nursing a cup of tea. Her dark hair was pulled into a messy bun, and she was scribbling furiously in a leather notebook. Every so often she sighed dramatically, gazing out the window as if waiting for a romantic movie moment to sweep her off her feet. Hopeless romantic, indeed. Evan Carter was just a block away, seated on a park bench with a small stack of books beside him. He had the kind of smile that made old ladies pinch his cheeks, and the kind of earnestness that made him a frequent guest at the local poetry readings. Cupid smirked. 2 lonely hearts, 10 minutes apart. This is going to be a cakewalk. Pulling an arrow from his quiver, he notched it onto his bow and took aim at Lila. With one smooth motion, he let the arrow fly. It glimmered in the fading sunlight, streaking straight toward her, until it ricocheted off the cafe window, hit a nearby lamppost, and struck a passing pigeon instead. The pigeon let out an indignant coo, spun in the air, and promptly fell in love with its reflection in a puddle on the sidewalk. "Oh, come on!" Cupid groaned, throwing his hands in the air. He quickly notched another arrow, this time aiming for Evan. But just as he released it, a jogger ran by, and the arrow bounced off her water bottle, veered into a tree, and hit a squirrel. The squirrel, dazed and enchanted, began chasing its tail in a frenzied display of self-love. Cupid slapped his forehead. "This is not how I wanted to end my day." Determined to fix his mistakes, Cupid decided to go for a direct approach. First, he hovered invisibly behind Lila, peering over her shoulder as she scribbled in her notebook. "Oh, Evan," she muttered dramatically, tapping her pen against her lips. "If only I could meet someone like you." Cupid blinked. Was this the Evan she was meant to be paired with? He glanced at her notebook and saw she was writing poetry. Bad poetry. Very bad poetry. "Roses are red, violets are blue. I want a soulmate, but where are you?" Cupid cringed. No wonder she was still single. Meanwhile, Evan was across the park, reading aloud to himself from a book of romantic sonnets. "Oh, love, thy strength is like the sun." He sighed wistfully and looked around, as if expecting someone to magically appear and swoon at his recital. These 2 were perfect for each other. Why was this so hard? Cupid decided to arrange a chance meeting. He flew to the cafe and nudged Lila toward the door with a soft gust of wind. She muttered, glancing at the clock. Maybe I'll take a walk before heading home. Excellent. He zipped over to Evan and caused a page in his book to flutter away, carried by an enchanted breeze. Evan jumped to his feet and chased after it. Perfect, Cupid muttered, clapping his hands. He watched as Evan followed the fluttering page right into Lila's path. Here we go, he said, holding his breath. The two collided with a soft oof, and Evan's book fell to the ground. Oh, I'm so sorry, Lila said, her cheeks flushing. No, it's my fault, Evan replied, crouching to pick up his book. Their eyes met, and for a moment the world seemed to hold its breath. Do you, like poetry? Evan asked, noticing the notebook in her hand. I love poetry, Lila said, smiling shyly. Cupid pumped his fist in triumph. Finally, everything was going according to. Actually, Lila continued, I write poetry. Evan's smile faltered. Oh, cool. What kind of poetry? She cleared her throat. Roses are red, violets are blue. Evan winced. Cupid groaned. No, stop talking. But Lila didn't stop. She launched into a heartfelt recitation of her latest creation, complete with dramatic hand gestures. By the time she finished, Evan was backing away slowly. It was nice meeting you, he said, and bolted. Cupid buried his face in his hands. What is wrong with these two? He decided it was time to pull out the big guns. That evening, he followed Evan to a cozy bookstore where a poetry reading was taking place. The small space was lit with strings of twinkling lights, and the scent of coffee lingered in the air. Evan took a seat near the front, clutching a notebook filled with his own work. Cupid, invisible to everyone, floated over to the sign-up sheet for performers. With a wave of his hand, Lila's name appeared at the top of the list. Half an hour later, she arrived, looking confused. I didn't sign up for this, she muttered, scanning the room. But before she could leave, the host called her name. Lila Bennett, you're up. The audience clapped politely as Lila hesitated, then made her way to the microphone. She fidgeted nervously, her notebook trembling in her hands. Hi, this is a poem I wrote called Dreams of Love. Evan, who had been staring at his coffee, looked up in surprise. Lila took a deep breath and began. At first her voice was shaky, but as she read, something shifted. The words, though simple, were raw and heartfelt. The audience leaned in, captivated. Even Evan found himself hanging on her every syllable. When she finished, the room erupted into applause. Lila's cheeks turned bright red, but she managed a small smile as she stepped away from the mic. That was beautiful, Evan blurted out as she passed his table. She stopped, her eyes wide. You think so? He nodded, suddenly shy. Yeah. I mean, it's not every day you hear something so honest. Thank you, she said softly. Would you, like to sit down? He asked, motioning to the empty chair across from him. I'd love to, she replied, her smile growing. Cupid watched from above, finally allowing himself to relax. Lila and Evan were deep in conversation, their connection blossoming naturally now that the awkwardness had passed. He slung his bow over his shoulder, feeling lighter than he had all day. As he took off into the night sky, he allowed himself a satisfied smile. Sure, the arrows hadn't worked exactly as planned, but sometimes love just needed a little nudge and a whole lot of patience. For now, his job was done. A table for two. The smell of freshly brewed coffee and the gentle hum of chatter filled the air, mingling with the faint melody of a love song playing overhead. It was Valentine's Day, and the small coffee shop tucked away on a quiet city street had been transformed into a cozy haven for couples and hopeful singles. Red balloons bobbed gently in the breeze from the door, and heart-shaped decorations lined the windows. Claire Daniels sat at a corner table, her hands folded neatly on her lap as she waited for her blind date to arrive. She had never been the type for blind dates, too unpredictable, too uncomfortable, but her best friend Harper had insisted. "Come on," Harper had said, all but forcing the dating app into Claire's hands. "You deserve to feel something again. It's been 2 years. Just try." 2 years. Claire swallowed hard at the thought. 2 years since everything had fallen apart. Since she and Ethan. Her chest tightened, but she pushed the thought away. Tonight wasn't about the past. Tonight was about moving forward. She glanced at her watch. Her date was already 10 minutes late. She exhaled softly, trying to ignore the pang of disappointment blooming in her chest. The door to the cafe opened with a soft chime, a gust of February chill sweeping in as a figure stepped inside. Claire barely glanced up, not wanting to seem eager. But then her breath caught. It was him, Ethan Green. He stood in the doorway, brushing snowflakes from his coat. His dark hair was slightly longer than she remembered, and he wore the same charcoal gray scarf she had once bought him for Christmas. For a moment he was just standing there scanning the room. Then his eyes landed on her, and he froze. Claire's heart stumbled in her chest. Of all the places in the city, of all the nights. Ethan's expression shifted from shock to something softer, though she couldn't quite place it. Slowly, almost hesitantly, he walked toward her table. "Claire," he said, his voice low and warm, though it carried the weight of too many unsaid things. "Ethan," she replied, her throat dry. She stared up at him, her emotions tangled, surprise, sadness, and something bittersweet. "Wow," he said, letting out a shaky laugh. I mean, it's been a while." "Yeah," Claire said softly. 2 years. He nodded, shoving his hands into his coat pockets. There was an awkward pause, thick with the kind of tension that only exists between people with unfinished stories. "Are you here with someone?" he asked, glancing at the empty seat across from her. Claire hesitated. "A blind date." Ethan blinked, his lips parting slightly. "Oh? What about you?" she asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted the answer. He rubbed the back of his neck. "Yeah, blind date too." Her stomach twisted. "Oh," she said, mirroring his reaction. They stood in silence for a moment, the noise of the cafe swirling around them. Claire couldn't look away from him, even though it hurt. His presence was a cruel reminder of everything she had tried to forget. The late-night conversations, the easy laughter, the way his hand fit perfectly in hers. Finally, Ethan cleared his throat. Well, I don't think my date's here yet, so... He gestured toward the empty chair. Mind if I sit for a minute? Claire hesitated. It felt like a bad idea. It felt like reopening a wound. But before she could think better of it, she nodded. Sure. Ethan slid into the seat across from her, and for a moment it was as if the world had narrowed down to just the two of them. So, Ethan said after a moment, breaking the silence, how have you been? Claire tilted her head, her lips curving into a faint, humorless smile. Do you really want to know, or is this the polite version of the question? Ethan winced, his gaze dropping to the table. I guess I deserve that. You don't have to answer, Claire said quickly, guilt creeping in. I'm sorry, that was... She trailed off, shaking her head. No, Ethan said firmly, his eyes meeting hers again. I want to know. How have you been? Claire hesitated. She could feel the truth pressing at the edges of her mind. The sleepless nights, the moments when she thought she was fine only to be ambushed by memories of him. The way she'd never quite stopped wondering if she'd made the right choice in leaving. But she couldn't say all that, not now. I've been okay, she said finally. Work's been busy. Life's been quiet. Ethan studied her, his expression unreadable. Quiet sounds nice. It's not always, she admitted softly. What about you? She asked, almost afraid of the answer. How have you been? Ethan hesitated, his fingers brushing the edge of the table. I've been figuring things out, he said vaguely. Claire frowned. What does that mean? He let out a small laugh, though there was no humor in it. It means I've been trying to make sense of things, of myself, of us. Her heart clenched. Ethan. I'm not trying to dredge everything up, he said quickly, holding up a hand. I think about you. A lot. Her breath caught, and for a moment she couldn't speak. She looked down at her hands, which were trembling slightly. I think about you too, she admitted quietly. The minutes stretched into an hour as they talked, their blind dates seemingly forgotten. At first, the conversation was awkward and hesitant, but slowly the walls began to come down. They talked about the little things, work, mutual friends, the new Italian restaurant that had opened in their old neighborhood. But beneath the surface, the weight of the past lingered, unspoken but palpable. Finally, Ethan leaned forward, his eyes searching hers. Do you ever wonder if we made a mistake? Claire froze, his words slicing through the air like a blade. Ethan, I'm serious, he said, his voice low. We broke up because we thought it was the right thing to do, but was it? Or were we just scared? Tears pricked at her eyes, but she blinked them away. You don't get to ask that now, she said, her voice trembling. You don't get to show up after 2 years and... I know, he interrupted, his own voice cracking. I know I don't deserve to, but I need to know, Claire, because I can't stop thinking about you. And maybe I should have said this sooner, but I'm saying it now. Her heart was pounding, and she didn't know whether to cry or scream or... I don't know, she whispered. I don't know if we made a mistake, Ethan. All I know is that it hurt. It hurt so much. His face crumpled, and for a moment he looked as lost as she felt. "It hurt me too," he said softly. "It still does." They sat in silence, the noise of the cafe fading into the background. Finally, Claire spoke. "What do you want me to say, Ethan? That we can just pick up where we left off? That the past doesn't matter?" "No," he said, shaking his head. "I don't want to pretend the past doesn't matter. I want to know if there's still hope. Even a little." Claire stared at him, her heart aching with the weight of everything unsaid. She wanted to tell him that she still loved him, that she'd never stopped. But she was scared of opening herself up again, scared of what it would mean if things fell apart a second time. "I don't know," she said finally, her voice barely audible. "I don't know if I can do this again." Ethan nodded slowly, though his eyes were filled with pain. "I understand." They sat in silence for a while, the air between them heavy with the weight of their shared history. Finally, Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small slip of paper. "If you ever change your mind," he said, sliding it across the table. "This is my number. No pressure, no expectations, just if you want to talk." Claire stared at the slip of paper, her heart twisting. She didn't know if she'd ever have the courage to call, but the gesture meant more than she could say. "Thank you," she whispered. Ethan stood, his eyes lingering on her for a moment before he turned to leave. The door chimed softly as he stepped out into the cold night. Claire sat there for a long time, staring at the slip of paper in her hand. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years. Hope.